How you doing today, Ryan?
I'm good, Nick. How about you?
Not doing too bad. We just had a great conversation. I feel like we could have probably talked for 2.5 hours. Don't worry if you're listening, this episode is not 2.5 hours.
Are you as excited about the options of getting back into the workplace as I am?
Who isn't? Yes, as a joke on my own words. That says it all.
No, we spent a lot of this conversation really discussing sort of the dynamics of what business leaders are dealing with as they're trying to re-envision what the workplace looks like, how they're bringing people back into the workforce, whether or not that's going to be the same type of model that they operated under previously, or how they might be innovating and evolving around their talent resourcing and how they're procuring new talent. So we covered a lot of territory, and I felt like it was a pretty robust episode dealing with just about every direction we could take with that topic.
Yeah, I think you covered it all. And for now, listening, if you don't happen to make it all the way through the end of the episode, we're going to change up the format a little bit. We're going to go to a season approach to give us a little bit more time for production and promotion, and to try and create some more content on a higher quality scale for you, with having a little bit more production time built in. So if you want to hang that out, I'm going to take that whole clip, separate it, put it in the feed separately. So just look out on your feed. You'll probably see a post about that soon if you don't happen to make it through the end.
And be sure to keep tuning in to lead.exe. We've got a lot of great content you may not have heard before that's worth going back as we do surface some of those clips. And believe me, we've got a lot of great guests already queued up for what we're going to call season 3 as we get to roll that out at the beginning of August 2021.
Yeah, you got that. And with that, let's just let everybody get on the show.
Thanks for joining us for another edition of Lead.exe. I'm Brian Comerford in Denver, Colorado.
And I'm Nick Lozano in Washington, D.C.
And today we're talking about, what are we talking about, Nick?
So people aren't aware. I don't know when somebody's listening to this, but it's March of 2021, and at least here in the States, things are starting to kind of open back up. People are getting vaccinated, and it leaves leadership with the question of, how do we get back to work? And in some of my discussions with, some IT leaders across separate industries, there's this fear of, when you're asking people who've been working remotely for a year to come back to the office, that they have to be back in the office 5 days a week, there's this worry that it's going to drive talent away. And we've seen companies like Atlassian say, you know what, you only need to come in the office 4 times a year. We don't care where you live. We don't care where you work from. Just those 4 times a year, we expect to see you. And it's opening up the talent pool. And you and I had discussed too that a company like Basecamp has decided they pay the Chicago rate for a developer or for somebody who works for Basecamp. It doesn't matter where in the world they're based. So we're starting to even see pay not be pegged to where somebody lives, just being pegged to where the HQ is. And you gave a great example of that too when you're talking about an organization in Denver who hires, across the United States, but they pay the Denver rate.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. Yeah, it was a little surprising to me to hear, because other than examples like Basecamp, that was one of the first times that it had really surfaced to my awareness that it was happening. But I was talking with a consulting firm that was trying to do some talent recruitment. And, through that process of discussion, I discovered that they were really, looking in a lot of other markets where the cost of living was considerably lower, and yet they were still willing to pay the Denver rate and use that as a form of enticement for their recruiting efforts, right? Because it ends up being, pretty appealing if you're in a marketplace that is maybe more rural or, is just in an area of the country where maybe housing is less expensive than in places like Denver or DC. And yet you're getting paid at a rate as if you were having to meet those cost of living expenses in that area. So I found that really interesting, that as really an enticement or a perk as part of their recruiting outreach, that was something that, that they were kind of leading with, fully expecting that they were going to be onboarding folks that were in different geographies than their Denver office is located.
Yeah, I think it's a great perk too, right? And you and I have talked about this before, and I think Basecamp has been doing this since long pre these pandemic days, because I think I remember reading it in the remote book or something like that, right? And that book's about 5 or 6 years old at this point in time.
Sure.
But I think it's a great perk, right? And it makes it easy for companies' HR departments to look and not try to figure out what the salary should be where somebody else is. And I imagine from a recruiting perspective, even as the recruiter, it's got to be difficult, right? Because what are they going to get? Like a budget range? And then it's basically like a bid process. It just seems really weird, right? It's like, go find me the best developer in the cheapest area that you can so that the cost is the lowest, right? When that's not necessarily the way you look for talent. And, government contracts can be a great example of that. They don't necessarily get the best quality, but they buy the cheapest quality because that's what, some regulations are, that they have to get the cheapest contract. So I think it's a great ad, and something like that, being able to work remotely, is better than, the naps and the chefs locate at a location, the unlimited vacation. To me, those are two bigger things that I see more organizations can be willing to open up with. And even smaller organizations, like let's say one's in Cleveland, Ohio, and they want to open it up that way and pay Cleveland rate. Well, that's great. Maybe somebody Cleveland's a fairly large, Midwestern city. Maybe somebody who lives in a smaller city like Toledo or something like that might be willing to remote, or someplace random in Wyoming, right?
Right.
The population's not that great, and the salary is really good for where they live. So I think it's a win-win for both, and it opens your talent pool to more than just who's available locally or paying to bring talent to you. Because we all know that hiring talent and then paying, their moving costs and all that for them gets super, super expensive from an acquisition perspective. And I know stuff like that's normally reserved for like executives and higher ups, but it's still an expensive cost no matter how much the talent costs.
Yeah, well, I think we've seen a couple of new factors, right? I mean, on the one hand, this is what I've heard referred to for a number of years as the inshoring model, right, versus outshoring or offshoring. We've done a lot of the looking for cheap talent in other countries where there are developers and paying them half the rate of what we would pay an American developer. Still gets us roughly the same quality at half the cost, and it's an improved wage for someone who's offshoring, right? So more of this onshoring model allows for us to continue to help create those jobs here, within our own borders. So there's certainly an economic benefit there. But the second factor, I think, is that we've seen all of this urban flight as a result of the pandemic over the last year, where people who have been traditionally shackled to living in a specific type of urban area suddenly find themselves in a position where they can relocate, where maybe they had one home that was in an urban area and they had another home that was a vacation home in the mountains or something. And now the vacation home in the mountains can become their primary residence, and they sell the place down in the city, and why not go live in the more pristine location? So it's created, I think, a bit of a conflict for a number of organizations who are now announcing that they're about ready to reopen their offices, and they've got a workforce that's been displaced by the pandemic, and at times willingly so. who are not excited about the idea of returning to an office. And in some cases, in fact, say, oh, okay, go ahead and mandate that I have to come back into the office. I'll be looking for another job. Right.
Yeah, that, and that's just from a leadership perspective. And you and I were talking about this a little bit offline is, this whole, requiring vaccines and mandating, people have them to come back in the office and that you need to come back to the office. And, I know it's a gray area in a lot of employment law, and I'm going to preface this that I'm not a lawyer. But, like reading the headlines, it seems like this is something that employers can make required that their staff to have. And just as a leader, I think, fear is relative to each person, right? I got the vaccine, but I don't know what your feelings are on it. Maybe you're the same, maybe it's not, but to force you to do something just because we can do something doesn't mean we should do something, I guess is what I'm trying to get at. And, you might have outstanding talent that will look for another job if you don't go other ways. It's a real fear that instead of just not only is your, as a leader, talent pool open to the country, their job opportunities have opened across the country.
Absolutely.
To probably even bump up their pay scale. I mean, if you're not in one of the hotbed cities like New York, San Francisco, DC area, Miami, where it's like super expensive, where wages are paid really high, what's stopping you from looking somewhere else? Like you said, it's going to drive people, I think, to really move around and move positions. I think if it goes along that path where everyone starts getting mandated.
Yeah, and I hear a lot about some of the troubles that certain industries are having right now getting workers, typically hourly wage based workers, to come back and reapply to positions that are open. They're struggling with trying to get people back in. I know there's been an argument that because of the unemployment stimulus, that it's created ultimately higher earnings for certain people by being unemployed than by actually going back to seek being reinstated at their prior job or, in a prior type of role in a specific industry. So it's also, I think, created a need for us to examine, again, from a leadership position, right? If you're not able to fulfill some of those jobs, then it's possible that they were already, undesirable from a wage-based perspective to begin with. And if there isn't something else put into place, either to elevate the wages that are being offered or to, create other incentives for those particular roles, that it will continue to be hard to now find a workforce who's willing to take those types of wages.
Yeah, I think you're completely right. It's going to be a recalibration, right? We've seen that in the hourly thing. I read an article the other day that, restaurants are having a hard time finding talent to come back. And I think that's a symptom of, that those were lower earning workers, right? And a lot of times when you work in the restaurant industry, you don't get paid leave, you don't get sick pay. So what happened? They got an opportunity to look for other jobs. That gave them sick time, gave them pay. So I think we're going to see a shift in talent, and some people, I feel like, just are going to early retire. Right? We got the baby boomers. A lot of them are in retirement age, and they just work from home for a year. Getting some of those people to go back in the office, they might not do that. Just say, I'm going to call this a career and going to sell my house in the city because I'm going to move somewhere further out anyways. So it's going to be a talent crunch, I feel like, and offering those benefits like that are going to be a big win for you as an organization. I don't know. We could look at this 2 years from now. We could be completely wrong, but I feel like if you don't allow some type of remote work and pay based on where your HQ is located, you're going to have a very difficult time retaining or acquiring talent.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting because I have a number of friends and former colleagues who are all now working for European-based companies because there was no need for them to continue to remain working for American companies when there was not the work available here. And sort of the same is true, right? And in some of those countries, they're even paying relocation benefits for people to uproot their stakes here and move into other countries. And globally, when you look at the makeup of other developed nations, I mean, you're talking about a lot of countries where cost of living is at a higher standard and base pay is at a higher standard. And there are other services that are actually included in taxes. So I know this is opening the whole can of worms on a lot of political, domain where we hear complaints about socialism or socialist countries. But when you really look at it, we've got socialist capitalist countries in the entire Western developed world, and predominantly in the most developed of the Asian nations as well. So, I think, again, from the perspective of reinventing and determining what can you do to incentivize people, it can come from a number of different creative approaches, right? As a business owner, you may want to explore a number of different approaches that don't necessarily involve just raising the base salary, but maybe it creates more flex time in your workplace, or maybe it has an offering of something like childcare, right? Where there are benefits that you can sort of custom tailor to the individuals that are coming into your workplace, rather than having everything that's driven by some kind of salary-based policy for the organization.
Yeah, and I think without even, getting the political side of it, I think now is a great time for organizations to look down at what their benefit packages are, what they're offering, and what's out in the marketplace. Like what are companies doing that you should notice? And it's even companies outside of whatever your industry is, right? Take a look at what Atlassian did. That's an extreme example. As a tech company, they're a little bit different, but still, it's like, look at it and chew on it and think about, what would it take to do that? What would your organization look like if you did that? And maybe it's something completely illogical for what you do, your industry. Maybe you have engineers that work on manufacturing equipment. It's impossible to do that. But it doesn't mean that there aren't days where they can swap, stay home. You can kind of do some of the same things with them, give them some type of benefits, because I'm always of the mind that, if you take care of the people that work with you, they'll take care of the business. It just works that way. I find is if you take care of people, they're more than willing to return the favor if they feel like they're valued and their contributions are there and you reward them for that.
I think there's a lot of data to support that. If you've got employee experience as one of your areas of your corporate strategy, then part of what that means is you're creating an experience where you have fantastic retention with your employees that are already in place. And when you've got that kind of culture, it drives a pride in the work that I think you can just feel that energy when you walk into a company that's of that type. And consequently, what that means is now you've got people who are happier, more satisfied. That's going to translate into how they interact with your client base, right? And potentially can help drive greater client satisfaction as well, along with greater retention for whatever your client base is for the industry that you're in.
Yeah, like you said, it's taking care of your people, right? If you're in leadership, your number one customer is your employees, really. That's the way I feel about it. It doesn't matter what you sell. It doesn't matter anything else. Everyone who's tactical will take care of that stuff. If you do your job and take care of the people, things will happen and things will get done. I think as long as you make that, when you're a leader, just in my opinion, if you make that your number one priority, things just have a way of falling into place. It's just just the way I've always felt about it, is that, you're in the people business, like Peter says, whether you know it or not. That's what business you're in.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. And it's remarkable to me the number of organizations that I've spoken with, as I'm, sitting in an advisory role myself, where I ask the question about where does the employee experience factor into your strategy? And it's kind of 50-50. There are a lot of companies that I've interacted with who've never put any thought into that whatsoever. It's just not part of what they think of strategically that's important to their organization, versus a number of other types of organizations where that's the number one pillar in whatever their corporate strategy is, right? Take care of your people, and all of these other things, will follow in succession. But you've got to have the people to operate the business to begin with. And you want to ensure that they're satisfied, that you don't have well-trained talent that is walking out the door because you're not taking care of people, right? Or because there's a culture that, fosters mistrust or, lack of collaborative spirit, all of those things. And I think there's another, factor that's interesting for us to consider too. We're starting to see percentages creep up on rates of inflation, but here we've seen a historical record run of cheap debt. And consequently, part of what that's meant is individuals have done a lot of things to take advantage of things like home ownership, right? Where they may not have had those opportunities previously. And they're taking advantages of cheap mortgages so that they can buy themselves either a first home or maybe an income property. They're refinancing homes that they may already live in so that they can cut their expense line items, and in some cases even consolidate a 30-year fixed mortgage into a 15, right? So all of a sudden, because of all this cheap debt, it has enabled people to also enlarge sort of the bottom line of what they're bringing home and able to put into the bank. So I heard you earlier say some people are looking at taking early retirement, as a result of that. And I think that is, absolutely true. I've seen a lot of moves in that direction. In fact, a really close colleague of mine kind of surprised me by saying that was a move that he was going to make. And he's, a decade away from retirement in terms of retirement age, so that he can start drawing Social Security. But that's, there are some opportunities that have been created as a result of, the economic conditions that we've gone through. And so part of why I bring it up also is I know that there are a number of industries that feel that their current incumbent workforce is kind of a graying workforce, and yet they're having a hard time bringing in younger talent because, younger talent tends to want to go get the hot tech jobs, right? But that's not the foundation of every industry. And so I think there's going to continue to be a lot of mentorship opportunities. And from a leadership perspective, I think it's, number one, it's very rewarding to be in that mentorship role. But number two, I think it's another path that can be offered to existing talent to say, hey, I understand, you're kind of carving your own path now and you're ready to get out of here sooner than we may have discussed. But I would love to discuss creating an opportunity for you to stick around and knowledge share, with a team of up and coming, folks who eventually are going to fill the same kind of role that you've been in.
Yeah, I think, like you said, the pandemic and a lot of people, being able to work from home for about a year has really caused people to stop and think about what they're doing, right? I was reading this great post by somebody on LinkedIn, and they're like, I decided to start my own business because I was thinking about having to return to work and the 4 hours of commuting I would have to do a day to do that. And he's like, it never set in my mind until I had to think about going back to the office. It just had become something he did constantly. So he never thought about it. So it kind of has hit a point where it let people kind of stop and reflect on what they're doing, to think if what they're doing is what they really want to do, or if they've just been kind of chugging along because that's what they've been doing. It's been the status quo for them for a while. And I would totally give somebody credit if I remembered who it was when I saw it. But if you're out there and you're listening to this and that was you, just let me know. But I don't mean to not give you credit. But it's a great reminder that a lot of times as human beings, we don't stop to think about the things we're doing sometimes, and if it still makes sense what we're doing. And that's, like you said, your colleague who's going to retire early. Maybe they just had the time to sit there and think, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore. I'd like to retire while I'm still young. Don't need the, 6-figure a year salary anymore. I can make it work on less than that and move out further. So it's been a real point of reflection for people, I think.
I think so too. I've known a number of people who have actually started businesses during all of this, which is, really inspiring. And talk about a leadership move, right? I mean, going from, I know one person who was in a very subordinate role, but what she figured out was a way that she could actually optimize making sales through creating an Amazon store during the pandemic, when so many people were suddenly shifting into, more of a purchase online and have it delivered to my home kind of model, and has been able to break away and, is now taking a lot of steps to continue to extend the schooling that she never completed, so that she can elevate herself into a place where she feels really confident as a business owner, even though she should already have that confidence. She made the move, and she's profitable, and it's the only thing she needs to do right now.
I love that. And I love hearing stories like that, because I always feel like people are hesitant to start businesses because they're like, well, why would somebody listen to me? Well, why not? Right? like it doesn't matter that you didn't go to Harvard and get an MBA from MIT. Like, at the end of the day, I don't ever remember asking consultants or vendors, hey, where'd you go to school? Like, how many years of work experience do you have? Like, no, you're asking for results, right? You're like, can you produce this result? Prove to me that you can produce this result, right? We don't ever, a lot of times, look at these credentials. I feel like a lot of times people get in that perspective. They think of it as like, this person's hiring me to do this, but like, no, they're hiring you as an organization to complete some task. Like I said, they pay for results. And hearing stories like that, I think it's just people have taken the time since they've been home to say, okay, well, I can produce this result. And they've had the time because, like that one person was given earlier, that 4 hours of commute's gone. So now he's got 4 hours a day to work on a side hustle. Right. And you still have time to pick up the kids and do everything else that you did before if you happen to have a family. It's been, like I said, a real reflection point, I think, for people. And we're going to see that probably disrupt a little bit of the talent market, probably some people doing career changes and stuff like that. I talked to somebody the other day, and she's like, hey, I want to make a jump into IT, but I'm not 22 years old. You don't have to be 22 years old to work in technology. I was like, technology needs more diversity. We need more women in technology. We need, people of all ages and genders and everything. It's too, white male dominated, like a lot of things are. And I was like, you can bring value. Don't feel like, don't let an age or a gender or something hold you back. There's opportunities there.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And, I've valued having very diverse teams. I've been lucky that as someone who has led many of those teams, I've had the benefit of being able to be the recruiter as well. It's always been something that I've really put forward as a value in my own exploration for talent, is not just looking for who's got the best credentials, but who's got sort of the best mindset, who's got really some of the soft skills to go along with what the role is going to require. Who's going to harmonize with the team? Who's going to bring some of that diversity of thought? All of these factors that they're different than just checking the box on filling a role. It's like, yep, you've got your degree in cybersecurity, and I need to fill a cybersecurity role, and that's enough. It's about a lot more factors than that. So,
and like you said, the soft skills are the things that are hard to teach. We can teach anybody about cybersecurity and running, Kali Linux and pen testing machines, but doing the soft skills, that's the stuff that's hard to teach. And when you interview somebody who has all those soft skills, sometimes for me at least, it can outweigh the technical skills, because we can always bring somebody up to speed.
Yeah, there's no question about it. And again, I think part of the point that I was driving to is now with sort of this unlimited reach in terms of who you're willing to bring into your workforce from a talent pool. It's not going to be true for every type of business. If you've got to have hands-on with certain types of work, then sure, obviously this won't apply. But for many of these types of roles, how many businesses have been vacant? How many buildings have been vacant in downtown DC since this started?
A ton.
Yeah, same is true in Denver. And I don't know that that's ever going to change. And so consequently, I think there's also going to be some fallout that we see with some of these commercial real estate spaces, right? Because the need for all of these office buildings, it's going to go away. There's going to be, there may be a lot more of these WeWork and Regus, types of setups where people can come in and have more of a hoteling setup, for their temporary workspace. But I think the demand for having big behemoth corporate offices is going to go away. And part of that will come from the fact that I think a lot of leaders at corporations are going to realize, hey, we just went through the world's largest test case in whether or not remote work can be productive. We've discovered that it can be. And actually, there are a lot of costs that we can cut over here with all of these expense line items that we have by maintaining this massive footprint, for a workspace.
Yeah, exactly. And I think even for the companies where, like, let's say you're a small regional MSP and in a small city in rural Illinois, that could be a boom for you too, because you might get somebody who's like, hey, I'm leaving Chicago. And you might be able to get physical talent in your door that you didn't have access to before, because they don't want to commute in anymore. They don't want the high mortgage, and they decide they're going to move out further. So it's kind of like that quote where it's like the future's already here. It's just not evenly dispersed, right? And I can't remember. That was in one of it was either in like Rework or Remote. And geez, I'll have to look up who the quote was from. But I was like, that's exactly perfect, because I have seen consulting. Like, I was at a big consulting firm before that had a monolithic, humongous HQ for all their staff, and they shut it down because they're like, it's nobody's here most of the time, and they moved it closer to the city because they're like, that's where our clients are. So I think we were already starting to see that happen, and this just kind of, was a shot in the arm and accelerated it.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And, I like that you brought up the book Remote. I heard you mention it earlier in the episode, but, that's one of those areas where, I don't think there's a lot of media that's been written about it. And, much of what we've seen sort of in the blogosphere, has often been very critical about remote work. I know we've talked previously about, posts that talk about working remote is really just about wasting time and, having more time to invest in social media. But again, we've just gone through the world's largest experiment in what remote work can look like and whether or not we can measure its productivity. I think it's fair to say that we've had a pretty successful test.
I would think so too. And just because I looked at that quote real quick, it was William Gibson.
That's what I thought. Yeah. Yeah.
The future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. But like you said, I think it's surprising that you said that because, like the KPMGs, the Deloittes, the Accentures, the IBMs, who normally do the gigantic white papers, have all dealt with remote workforces. And to think, when I stopped and I think about it, I was like, I don't think I've read one single report from them about remote work, and that's how they all operate. It's like,
that's interesting.
I'm like, they're perfect for writing the use cases for those because they've been doing it for 20, 30 years. Because that's what you do. You hire KPMG to come do some huge SAP implementation somewhere, and people never see the consultants. Some of them are a mix on site. Some of them, work from their homes full time. So I think it would be interesting to see a use case from somebody big like them to show that it works even on a humongous global level. So it's just interesting you said that, and that had just popped into my mind.
Yeah, that's a great point. And, again, I think part of what happens when you're sort of in that consulting space is you often get so caught up in advising others about how they should be doing things, you forget that you need to be eating your own dog food, right? And I think that's kind of the wake-up call that a lot of companies are going through right now. And for those that are forward-thinking, they're putting some of those incentives in place to be able to say, hey, we feel like we've got enough data on what this looks like. And actually, we're pretty confident we can get talent that's as good, if not better, but we have to be competitive. And so here's what we're willing to do to ensure that.
Yeah, I think that's perfect. And I think at some point they probably will do a white paper, especially since what has all just happened. And I know from their perspective, for just making sales, there's probably lots of questions about how do you manage cybersecurity with that? How do you manage IT staff, problems remotely? How are you doing help desk? And they've been doing it forever. And for them, a white paper is a perfect way to sell their product. So I'm sure it's coming. I'm sure.
Oh, I'm sure it's coming. I'm sure we'll see some Gartner reports to that effect as well. And also, how do you serve your clients? I mean, that's another component to it.
Forever. Yeah.
And what's the demand look like? I mean, we talked about the example of how much shopping from home has continued to evolve as a preferred method during the pandemic. Well, that preference isn't going away. You can't put the genie back into the bottle, with that one. And so how many other dimensions look very similar to that? There are a lot of industries and organizations that we have to interact with on a routine basis where, no one's excited about the idea that you actually have to physically go to a location to interact with a human being to accomplish some kind of transactional task. And so, we've seen a lot of these things emerge over time where there was a lot of hesitancy in the beginning and a lot of naysayers who said this won't work for our type of business. And of course, now we're seeing it from, purchasing real estate where a client never sets foot into a home to, purchasing a vehicle that you've never even had the opportunity to test drive. Right?
Exactly. And so when I think of this, I just think back to that company you had showed me a long time ago where they could, figure out a property, how to insure it just by flying a drone around it.
Right.
And taking an image and using AI to figure it out. And I'm like, man, that they're probably just booming right now because everyone's thinking of how people don't want, people they don't know in their homes or around their homes.
Yeah.
And all you gotta do is get some guy with a drone to step way back, stand in the road, and buzz around your house, and he's gone in 15 minutes. They got all the 4K footage they need to zoom in and see everything. So I think you're totally on point. And I also feel like there's some niches that will, or niche, I can never remember which way they say that, but
I go with niche.
Niche, yeah, niche. I'm just like, But, I just think there's still some things where people are going to want in-person, like, interaction, right? Like the record store, right? Go to a record store here, like, create music, talk to the person who knows everything, because you want to, that human interaction too is a good thing. Just think of like those little weird things where it's kind of hard to buy at a store, like maybe a bicycle where you got to sit on it and you want to ride it and see what it feels like.
Right.
And unless you're some type of huge cyclist and you already know what you like, but I feel like the majority of the public would like to ride a bike. So I think it's just going to be a paradigm shift, like you said, right?
Sure.
Yeah, but there'll still be this expectation of somehow I can do transactional business without seeing you. So I think it's time for organizations to adapt, right? And what you said about the remote working not working, I remembered a decade ago when I worked at a huge consulting company, the only way we had meetings was over Skype. Literally no other way they would schedule a meeting. They're like, if one person is on Skype, everybody is on Skype. So if one person's remote, everybody has to be on Skype. And literally almost always had somebody remote. So everybody would be on Skype. And it wasn't a huge deal. Like, work got done. So that was a decade ago.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, there's plenty of room to innovate. And I think for leaders who are really on the fence about what they should do with their talent pool, whether they should invoke demands about bringing people physically back into the office, or they should start thinking about really instantiating some flexible options. Now's the time for innovative thinking, and particularly when it comes to what the entire business model can look like. There may be new products to emerge right along with that new talent that you can procure.
I think that's a great wrapping point, Brian. And while we're on the topics of innovation, why don't we just say a little bit about what we're going to do with this podcast? If you've been listening at any point in time, we really appreciate it. We've been posting on the 1st and the 15th of every month for dang near 2.5 years. But what we have found is that as time has gone on, we've gotten busy. It's made it very difficult to keep that pace and keep episodes with interesting guests going and promoting them and everything. So we have decided to go to a season-based approach. 10 episodes a season. We're going to launch the next season. So this is going to be the last episode you're going to hear from us for a little bit. I'm going to try to throw some clips in the feed while people are waiting of little snippets of old episodes. But we're going to go to a season-based 10 episodes starting in August to try to, give us a little more time for production, to source guests a little bit better, makes it a little bit easier for scheduling if we got some production time to get people in and to kind of go along more themed paths every season as we want to explore different things and different topics a little more in depth. Makes it a bit easier to bring on a guest for multiple episodes because it's, in a season. So that's what we're going to do with the podcast. Do you have any thoughts on that, Brian? I just talked a lot.
No, I think you explained everything well. There's, a good rationale behind it. And we're following, some other, I think, sort of leading edge podcast approaches to, how it can be accomplished and still have some of our own work-life balance and also be better curators of some of the content that we're showcasing. So, where does that put us today, Nick? Is this the end of season 2? Is that how we would qualify this?
Let's just call this the end of season 2 and the next one season 3, right? Because I don't want to say it's like season 5 if we divide episodes up, because we'll figure it out. But just hang on the feed. I'm going to pull some small clips from some older episodes, try to throw them in the feed so that you still have some great stuff to listen to. And maybe you've been joining us only since episode 40 and didn't hear some of the other guests. So it's a great opportunity to go back in the feed, explore some content. And like I said, we appreciate everybody who listens, whether it's one episode or all 50 something episodes. We greatly appreciate that.
Indeed, we do. Thanks for listening and stick with us. We've got a lot of great content coming up, a lot of great new guests already in the queue for season 3.
All right. See you then.
Bye.